Hi everyone, today we're talking to Stephen Huppert. He is an experienced and qualified actuary with over 30 years of experience across life insurance, wealth management and super. Today he runs what he calls a portfolio career where he's focused on providing advice to improve the retirement outcomes for Australians. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, look, it's a pleasure.
So before we get into some of the interesting questions I've got for you today, this idea of a portfolio career, can you tell me a bit about what that's like and how you managed to create that?
Yeah. So look, it's a great question and it's sort of a work in progress still. I'm sort of making it up as I go along a bit. But about 4 or 5 years ago, I was in a startup which didn't work out, got quite toxic. I left that business working out what to do. I'd been in big professional services firms like Deloitte and EY. I'd been in small professional services firms. I'd been working in life insurance. And I took the time to stand back and think about, well, what do I want to do next? And at my point in life, it was, very much sort of late 50s, thinking about where the future might be. And a couple of people asked me to help out on various bits and pieces and, small consulting jobs. And I was quite enjoying that. And then a couple of emerging businesses, startups approached me to help out as well. So I said, yeah, that sounds great. So I signed up to be part of those businesses. And then before I knew it, I had a portfolio of 4 or 5 jobs. And as we were talking just before we started recording, I've got 5 different email addresses and calendars with the various
5 calendars.
Still learning how to juggle. And it does very much feel like juggling. But about 12 months ago, I realized actually it is a portfolio very much like an investment portfolio. So some of the work I do, I might be working as an expert witness on a class action. I can charge pretty good rates, not quite the rates I used to charge when I was in a big 4, but pretty good rates. If I'm doing work as a business, being part of a business, it's much more about sweat equity and low rates and success fees or whatever it might be. So the approach I've taken is if somebody wants me to help them, or if I find somebody that's doing something interesting, get to know them. Are we going to enjoy working together? Is it a problem that needs to be solved? And then I can worry about how we commercialize it. What's the value? How we share that value? And again, as I say, it's a bit of a make it up as I go along. People look at my LinkedIn profile and get a bit confused. Oh, you've got this job. No, you've got that job. Well, I said, yep, I've got all of them.
All of them. You wear all those hats.
And sometimes I have to think about which hat I'm wearing when I'm talking to somebody, or even a mixture of the two. But I'm enjoying the flexibility and the variety. I certainly enjoy being my own boss in terms of being able to decide who I talk to, what sort of opportunities to pursue, rather than being told what's the profitability of that. Maybe I should be thinking about that sometimes a bit more, but my wife thinks I should, but that's okay. And some weeks, some months, it might be 120% working. Other months, it might be 50, 60%. It really varies. So in a nutshell, that's what I mean when I describe myself as having a portfolio of jobs.
Yeah, how interesting. 5 calendars sounds like an absolute challenge, Stephen. I don't know how you manage that. But it does sound like you've got a really interesting suite of opportunities and projects and different people that you're working with as part of that portfolio career. And it sounds like it wasn't necessarily an intentional direction. It sort of happened as a result of maybe a career curveball that sort of put you in that direction. So keen to talk a bit more about career curveballs, because you've been working for over 30 years. I'm sure you've had a couple of career curveballs in your time. Can you tell us a bit about what you've learnt from those career curveballs and any tips for actuaries who might be coming up against unexpected pivot points in their careers?
I think that's really important. And, if you think about one of the key actuarial skill sets, it's helping our clients or the organizations we work for do strategy and operate their business in uncertainty. And the actuary job is to try and put a little bit of parameters around that certain uncertainty. And we can't, if we think about it, we can't tell them exactly what the value will be in 20 years' time, but we can put some framework around it and probabilities around it. And that thinking about uncertainty has really helped me a lot, especially in the last sort of 7 or 8 years when I've had a few of these curveballs. We can't predict the future. And as actuaries, we know that more than most, but sometimes we don't apply it to ourselves. And if I look back at my career, I've made very few active decisions to move jobs. A lot of them, more often than not, has been a curveball, as you say. So I spent 10 years as an actuary at Colonial Mutual Life Assurance Company, which no longer exists. And I'd been there for 10 years and I didn't have any, I thought I could be there another 10 years, who knows? And all of a sudden, the business is gone from its Melbourne office and then it went completely. So I had to find something else to do. I was part of a small boutique consultancy that got bought by EY, which I didn't think was a great move, but it had happened. And again, I had to cope with that. And similarly, I was in a startup, which, that was one of my key decisions, was to move from Deloitte to a startup. And that was one of the hardest decisions from a career perspective I've ever made, and probably the boldest thing I've ever done. And I sometimes look back and surprise myself that I made that decision. But then after 12 months, it went bad. And even though going into it, I thought what could really go wrong, all the different scenarios I played out in my mind, I never predicted the one that happened. So 3 or 4 times in my career, I was sitting very comfortably in a job that suddenly went. And
the carpet was pulled out from beneath you.
Absolutely. And it's important when you're thinking about making decisions that you separate the process from the outcome. And sometimes you haven't got as much control as the outcome as you think you might, but you certainly have a lot of control about the process and how you think about it. So when those things happened, some I had a bit of warning, some I had no warning. It's thinking, okay, what comes next? And a bit like what I'm doing now, you sort of morph into something and it evolves and think, okay, this is actually not too bad. And I'm not saying, the carpet being ripped out was the best thing that ever happened, but overall, it's not a negative. At the time, it's negative, and the challenge and the emotions, and you can't ignore that, and it's important to embrace that. But it's also important to put it in some sort of context and think, okay, what do I do now?
So separating out the outcome itself, or the what's actually happened, and the process of what you then need to do. And so where do you start with that process? What are some of the key things in your process when that career curveball comes and you need to work out what to do next?
Not take it personally is, I think, important. People of my age in financial services have probably got at least 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 redundancies in their history. Whether it's through mergers, acquisitions, businesses changing direction. So don't take it personally is really important. And even if it is slightly personal, like one of mine that I went through, and it was pretty traumatic for myself and my family, and how could this happen? And where did it come from? I didn't see it coming. Deal with that. It is a grieving process. So don't think you can jump straight back into looking for a new job the next day. Take some time to reflect. What somebody said to me as I was going through that period, some great advice he got was somebody that does a lot of work with AFL elite sports, football teams. When the players come in for half time and they've had a bad first half, the coach doesn't immediately start ranting and raving and telling what they do in the next half. They grab a bottle, they grab a couple of snakes to eat, or they sit down and refresh. And you need to get you back into the right frame of mind to go back and re-enter and get re-energized. And I found that was really important advice. So, don't just go out and start ringing people and looking for jobs the next day. Recognize that you're going through an emotional process with it, talk to people about it. A lot of people talk about working aloud. I don't know if you've ever come across that term, but there's a whole movement of working aloud. And the way I interpret that is, don't try and do it all internally. So it wasn't that I didn't start talking to people again, but I wasn't talking to people about looking for a job. I was talking to people about, and it wasn't about whinging what I'd gone through, but it was about, okay, here am I, here are some things I'm thinking about. Does that make sense to you? And finding some trusted confidants or colleagues that I could throw ideas around. And even that's one of the big things I've learned over the last 4 or 5 years. If you ask me, what do I do? I think, well, how do I explain that? But it's okay that you can't explain it well. Don't feel you've, and a lot of people focus on, I need the 30-second elevator pitch. And I'm sure a lot of the people watching this, as one of the younger actuaries, will be drummed into them. You need your elevator pitch. Sure, that's helpful, but don't feel just because you haven't got one that you can't talk to people about what you're doing or what you'd like to do, or it's an opportunity to explore new avenues.
Yep. Such great advice, Stephen, especially, for someone like yourself who's had a long actuarial career and you've done lots of different things. Just that reassurance, I suppose, that those career curveballs can come, and they can be quite a shock. But it can be helpful to just take some time and process that and talk to people about that and start to sort of, be open to what might happen next. Because sometimes having those labels, that 30-second elevator pitch, sometimes that can be kind of restraining in some ways anyway. It can be a bit limiting if you start to think that's sort of who you are, that's your identity, I guess. And I know you've talked before about this idea of the actuarial identity. Can you tell me a bit more about what you mean by the actuarial identity and why that's important, why that matters?
Yeah, it first sort of manifested itself probably about 2/3 of my sort of 10-year stint in life insurance. And I was starting to think, do I stay here? Do I go and try to find other jobs? And I started doing some interviews. And one of the things that hit me as I was going to, some of the jobs I was interested in were quite left field things. And people would say, "Oh, you're a life insurance actuary. We don't need a life insurance actuary here. We haven't got any mortality tables that need working on, or life insurance policies that need valuation." And it hit me that because that was my identity in their eyes, they'd already decided that I wasn't suitable, or why would we need you? Or and people must have it all the time. Oh, you're an actuary. You must be good at maths.
Absolutely.
And I think it got me reflecting a lot on my identity. And quite a long time ago, I can't remember when, but it would have been maybe 15 years ago at least, I stopped having actuary on my business card. And people would comment on that. And I'd say, well, I spent 5 years teaching high school maths before I became an actuary. And I don't put that on my business card either, though that 5 years was really informative to how I interact, how I work as an actuary in terms of the teaching and that. So, and I don't put the fact I'm a father of 2 daughters or whatever on my business card, but all of that is what I bring to work. So I stopped putting actuary on my business card and had nothing on my, and even now I don't even have I basically have just Stephen Huppert on my business card. And if people use business cards anymore, I don't have a company name or anything. I do have for trading, but I'm not.
You've got 5 of them.
5 of them, but yeah. So it's Stephen Huppert you're getting, and Stephen Huppert happens to be an actuary and an ex-high school maths teacher, and all the other things I've done come together and hopefully mean I can provide the advice that you need, provide the support you need to solve some difficult problems. One of the other parts of being an actuary, I think, it's tough to get there. It took me almost 10 years of study. I did it, all by correspondence, no university actuarial course.
You did it the hard way, Stephen.
Yeah, I guess so. And so you don't want to just throw that away. You want to have that prominent on your identity. Look, I spent 10 years working towards this. It's important. That's who I am.
You've earned it. You want to take on that identity. And even when you're getting on the way, you can't call yourself an actuary until you get to the end. So it's almost this, now I can call myself an actuary. Now this is who I am.
It's a privilege and a responsibility, and it's one we do need to embrace. But again, we need to be careful, I feel, for me anyway, don't let it take over. And often I'll say there's a difference, especially in the world. I've spent 20 odd years consulting. I come across people, there are actuaries who are consultants, and there are consultants that happen to be actuaries. And understanding that difference is really important. And I'm not saying one's right or what's wrong. It's what's good for you as an individual. I'm an actuary that consults. It's very clear what you want me to come and help you with. You need me to solve your actuarial problems. But the fact that I'm a consultant who happens to be an actuary means I can do a bit more than just solve actuarial problems. And again, we need both. And I think if you can work out what it is you'd like to be able to do, which one you'd like to be, and it could probably apply equally as well to actuaries in corporate environments too. I'm a life insurance manager who happens to be an actuary, or I'm an actuary who happens to be a life insurance manager. There's again different ways of thinking about it. And again, it's not trying to say one's right, what's wrong. It's about what works for you as an individual and your identity and how you want to be positioned.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I guess, you know, to the extent that you can work out how you see yourself and your own brand, you know, brand Stephen Huppert versus actuary, you know, you and I are both actuaries, but you and I also do very different work as well. So it's really interesting, that concept of identity and how actuary fits into that identity. And whether we lead with that, whether we need to, and, you know, certainly in the work I do outside of traditional fields, my clients often don't know what actuaries are anyway. So it really can just depend on the situation. But I can see how being mindful of that and being aware of how you fit that into your identity can also sort of have an effect on how you see yourself and how you see yourself adding value to the world, or which roles you might be able to contribute to and add value in. So
yeah, that's very true. You know, ever since I entered the actuarial world, 1989 or whatever it was, the Actuarial Institute has been talking about wider fields or actuaries doing other things. You know, it's a 30-year journey and we're still talking about it today. And I look at that conversation over the last 30 years and think, I get it and I know why it's happening, but is it asking the wrong questions? Yeah.
What questions do you think we should be asking?
Not I'm an actuary, I can help a non-traditional area, but here's a bit like with you, you're a perfect example. Here's an area that we don't usually find actuaries, but I've got certain skill sets that can be valuable in that area. And it's an area I'm passionate about. I'm going to go and work in that area. Help. Yeah. Yep. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm an actuary and that gives me certain, you know, and in fact, I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday that sometimes it is important to push I'm an actuary because I'm a member of the Institute. I've got professional standards. I've got a code of conduct. It says something about the way you operate around the integrity.
Talks to professionalism.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, don't hide it too much, but don't lead with it.
Yep. Yeah, excellent points. So you've talked a little bit about coming into the actuarial profession, being a maths teacher beforehand, some curveballs and this concept of actuarial identity. Keen to hear whether you've got any sort of risks or regrets along that have come up throughout your career and what you've learned from those.
Yeah, I guess if I look back, one of the things I've never really done is had a career plan, an aspiration, an objective. You know, I have always worked with people that, you know, I'm going to be a GM one day and here are the things I need to do to get there. And that's all quite valid. I tended to always, even though I might have chosen to be in a certain role, enjoyed and made it my own and felt I did a good job. I guess more recently, and understanding that concept of, well, what is my mission in life or what do I want to do as an actuary? We tend to look at it in very concrete terms, whereas probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I said, actually, it's what am I really passionate about? It's helping people get better outcomes in retirement. Now, that doesn't mean being a partner in a firm or being a general manager or being all right. It's actually stepping out of that being to what am I really passionate about? And, you know, being passionate about helping people get better outcomes in retirement means I could be part of a business called Optimum Pensions, where we've designed a better retirement product. I can be part of a business which is Laneway Analytics, which is a data analytics business, giving the tools to super funds to better know their members so they can better guide them into retirement. So there's so many different ways I can work towards that passion of better outcomes in retirement. So that's a more recent sort of realization, I guess you could say. That's probably the main thing. And I guess the other part of it is certainly coming out of my 10 years in life insurance is, you know, don't expect that the company you're working for is always going to be there.
Right. Yeah. And certainly a lot of life insurance actuaries today would be experiencing that as well. So much consolidation.
And you know, your identity, and back to that word, and your satisfaction, your work becomes very much enmeshed in the organization you're working with. You raised the term brand before. And one of the things I think is good that, you know, young actuaries, especially as they're looking towards management and their career, how do I develop my identity and my brand within a corporate brand? And, you know, they're not exclusive. The way I often think about it is the Venn diagram, where here's my brand and my integrity and my values, and here's the corporate ones, and they overlap. and how much they need to overlap for me to be comfortable working in that environment. And that changes over time as well. And how much do they not overlap before I have to think twice about something else? And within any organization, you've got to think about your personal brand, both within the organization, but also external facing. And I think they both need to be managed in different ways. And then how does that fit into the corporate brand, which is especially if you're a consulting actuary, and whether you're in a broader professional services firm or an actuarial consulting firm. But I think it applies equally as well to an actuary in a life insurance or general insurance company. Your personal brand is still something that you need to work on, to manage, to control.
Yeah, so unhooking who you are from, and how I guess whether you're an actuary or however you see yourself as a useful worker, and unhooking that from the organisation that you work for. And we can get stuck in that, especially if we start as a graduate somewhere and we get qualified there, and you spend a lot of time there. And a lot of actuaries do this, that will stay in the same organisation for a long time. It can be easy to start to think of yourself as, oh, I'm a Big Four actuary, or I'm a this insert insurance company brand here actuary. That can become who you are, when really there's this large ecosystem of workers and actuaries and non-actuaries and other professionals out there that we're part of.
And recognise that you will have some sort of emotional connection with the company you're working for, and that will change over time. And if you do leave or think about leaving, that's one of the things you need to work through, and don't ignore it.
Yeah, take some time to process that. Yeah, fantastic. So my final question for you today, Stephen, is around specifically actuaries stepping into management roles for the first time. What top tips or advice would you have for actuaries that are making that transition?
I guess there's two key ones I'd think about. One is, you've worked really hard to be an actuary, you've trained, you've studied, you didn't just decide I'm going to be an actuary and tomorrow you're an actuary. Think of management in a similar way. Just because you've got a label manager or you're thinking about becoming a manager and you become a manager, that doesn't mean you're a good manager. Study, learn, talk to people, and work out the best way for you to learn how to do it. Some people will go and read the management books, others will find courses to do, others will observe and find mentors or coaches. So it needs to be much more personal, but recognize that being a manager is a learning, is a skill you can learn. Leadership is a skill you learn. Yes, some people are born managers, born leaders, whatever, but very few. And don't be fooled. Don't think, oh, look, that guy's just the born manager.
Doesn't happen naturally always.
Yeah. So I think, treat it like you might have treated learning how to be an actuary. The other one, and this was some advice given to me when I moved from corporate world into consulting world, is to think about the emotional wake that you leave. And if you think about a boat, so if you think about a motorboat out on the ocean, in the bay or in the harbour, it goes along and it leaves a wake in the water behind you, and a long time after the boat's gone, the wake's still there, and you brushes up against the shore. So in every interaction we have, we do leave an emotional wake. You come in, you have a chat to somebody, it might be one of your team, it might be a manager, it might be a senior manager, it might be a client. When you leave that room, you will leave a wake behind. You will leave an impression. Are you thinking about that? Are you thinking about how other people, and again, that's linked back to the concept of brand as well. Some people say brand is what people think about you when you're not in the room. And it's very much tied into that idea of emotional wake, and recognize that every interaction, you will leave a bit of impression behind.
That's a really, really interesting concept, Stephen, an emotional wake. So what are there any sort of specific examples or specific things that you think about when you're thinking about the emotional wake that you're leaving behind after an interaction?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because you need, the other, I guess, buzzword that we need to think about when we're doing that is authenticity. We don't want to try and be something we're not.
True.
So, and you do come across, and I'm sure everybody, watching this will have examples where they've had interaction with somebody and it just comes across as unauthentic. They're trying too hard to be something they're not. And so for people aspiring or moving into management, yes, you look around and see how others are doing it, but you also need to make sure it's consistent with how you want to operate. So, emotional wake is not necessarily something I might think about every minute, but, you know, in preparing for this conversation, and I might even explicitly use that term for myself. But if I think about this conversation, what you did, what I did, it was a bit of prep, bit of reading, bit of thinking about what the viewer wants to get out of it, a bit about the, you know, to be honest, you know, there's an impression I want to leave behind to people watching as well. So I think about that actively and get actively and authentically as possible. Whether I get that right all the time or not, who knows? But yeah, I think that's really important to think about, that it's an active but an authentic concept that you do think about.
Yeah, so being authentic and being true to yourself, but also being mindful of how you're coming across and, you know, how that's affecting the people around you, and you know, whether or not that's also in line with, I mean, I think personal brand's an interesting one, and I think authenticity is important behind that. I don't think we want to create personal brands that don't reflect who we actually are. I think that sounds like a lot of work for, I'm not really sure why you would do that, but so I think authenticity is important, but I think we can also be authentic and still be mindful of those around us, and adapt our style sometimes, and adapt as needed. And sometimes that can be one of the challenges when you are coming up through the ranks as well, realizing that not everybody is like you or communicates like you.
Really important.
And being able to sort of adapt and tweak your messaging to sort of make sure you're getting the best impact. Doesn't mean you're not being authentic, it just means that you're you know, being more effective while still being true to yourself. You know, you're not coming across
and remembering that, you know, when you have those one-on-ones you do as a manager, and you know, you're having a one-on-one with a subordinate, and you know, a young actuary comes into the room, you're not just talking to an actuary, you're talking to a person.
That's right, a human being.
And we often forget that, you know, and what I think happens is we're a bit anxious ourselves. You know, we've got to do a bit of disciplinary conversation, or it's a difficult conversation we want to have, or even a positive conversation. It's something that we're anxious about, and our anxiety tends to dominate how we do it, and we forget the person on the other side. Yeah, we're too wrapped up with how we're feeling, and we lose sight of the bigger picture. And it's okay to be anxious about it. Don't get me wrong. It's not about coming in and gung-ho about it, but it's okay. I've got that anxiety. I need, you know, my job as the manager here, or a bit like dealing with your children. I'm the parent in the room. Yes, I'll deal with my anxiety or difficulty I've got, but I also need to consider it from your point of view, and how do we get the best outcome here? Yep. Excellent. Such great advice. Thank you, Stephen. So we've talked about your portfolio career and how you kind of maybe accidentally started to evolve into that sort of direction. We've talked about your 5 calendars, and I'm going to keep talking about that because I don't know how you manage that. But we talked about career curveballs and how they do come up over the course of one's career, and you know, whether that's in the, you know, different an organisation change, or a, you know, an unexpected work change or role change or redundancy, and how it's important to give yourself time to process that and recognise that sometimes that can be an emotional experience that needs some time to work through, and some, you know, carefully curated sounding boards, and, you know, other people that you can actually talk that through with in terms of working out what you want to do next. We've talked about not wanting to pigeonhole yourself, or, you know, too tightly curate your actuarial identity or your personal brand, being authentic, but still also thinking through, it's not just about the titles, it's not just about the 30-second elevator pitch, it's about who you are and what you bring to the table, and all of you, not just what your current job title is or your current qualification, but the other parts of your life or previous careers or domestic responsibilities as well that shape you and help create who you are. We've talked about some of your, I guess, regrets, but thinking around how your career, how you think about your career and how that's evolved over time, how you've moved away from being kind of thinking about your organisation or the role, or, you know, having a linear career path or plan around where you want to go next, but to really think about what it is that's important to you and where you want to make a difference, and then finding roles that allow you to make a difference in line with what you're passionate about. I think that's really, really, really important, especially when we've come through a very sort of linear actuarial education process, which, you know, we can get to the end of that and think, oh, now I'm a life insurance actuary, that's who I am, and I just need to find life insurance actuarial jobs, when actually
it's quite a self-limiting way of looking at what you can do and the value that you can bring. And you've shared your top tips for new managers around, recognising that being a manager is a skill in itself, and it's something people can learn. And whilst some of us might have more natural aptitudes than others, we all need to work on that and to take that on as skill building in the same way that we do our technical skills. I think that's really, really, really good point and good advice. And I love your comment about the emotional wake and remembering that as well, that, whether we're technical actuaries or managers or whatever role we have, whatever we call ourselves and whatever our identity is, or our authentic selves, that we're people and we're working with other people. And, we need to keep that in mind as well as we have those interactions and just think about, it's not just about us, it's about those around us as well. I think that's really, really great advice for all actuaries. So is there anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up today, Stephen?
No, that's a wonderful summary you just gave. Terrific. No, I've really enjoyed having the conversation. And I guess similar to what I said earlier, I've learned a bit as I've had this conversation and don't feel you need all the answers.
We're all a work in progress. Stephen, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really great to hear your stories and your advice and tips for younger actuaries. Thank you.
Pleasure.